Welcome, friends of the Greasy Shop Rag. Today we're going to take a look at a Husqvarna 572 XP chainsaw. Customer complaint is that it barely runs and has no power. The customer in this case happens to be Chris from the YouTube channel In the Woodyard. So some of you may be familiar with this saw, or at least have seen it in some of his videos. We're going to go through it and find out why he doesn't have any power. Well, the first thing I always do is look in the fuel tank. First thing I noticed was that it did not have the new blue fuel filter on it. We pressure tested the fuel line and it was good. So we put our new upgraded, updated Husqvarna fuel filter on it. It's a smaller micron than the previous orange filter. I'm not sure why there was a white filter on here. So we're happy now with the fuel tank. I don't think that the filter itself was plugged so bad that it was creating the problem, but it did need to be updated. Not surprised at all. It's clean underneath here. The air filter looks good. Let's take a look in the cylinder and make sure it's not scored. Spark plug looks decent. Inside of the cylinder looks decent. So I put this on the computer, and I don't remember what the exact error codes that were listed, but it suggested that I pressure test it. So that's what I'm going to do. And I'm prepping the saw right now for a pressure and vacuum test. That adapter I put in the spark plug hole is where I'm going to hook my pump. Right now I'm removing the muffler so I can put a block off plate on here. While I've got that muffler off, I'm taking a little bit better look at that piston skirt. Looks good. So this is an official Husqvarna block off plate. And we want to seal the crankcase, and then we're going to put air in it, and we're going to pull a vacuum on it and make sure it doesn't leak. I also have to seal the intake though. That's a little bit more difficult. And to do that I have to pull the carburetor off. Now I'm going to show you all the steps to do this, but you know, there was probably 45 minutes to an hour of video footage here, and I don't want to make a video that long. So you'll see all the steps, but we're going to speed through it. There we popped off the fuel line from the carburetor. And then we have the electrical connector for the port that we plug the computer into. We loosened the screws on the air box, and now we're pulling the bolts out. This one's being stubborn. And we have right here our fuel return line, and that's on the back of the primer bulb. So we're going to kind of pop that off of the bulb. Pop. Okay, that's off of there. I got to remove the fuel line on the carburetor too, so I might as well dump the fuel out of the tank because otherwise there's going to be a big mess. So the fuel looked good. I didn't see any water in it. Obviously it had oil in it. Here we're removing the throttle cable. So basically we opened the throttle, then we held it open, and then that created slack in the cable that we could pop it out of its holder. And now I'm just sliding the fuel line off the carburetor. There we go. And then to get it off, there's one clip down here on the bottom that's kind of holding the carb in place. Now, it's kind of hung up, so there's a connector for the auto tune. It's that white piece there, and it snaps into a holder on the side of the carburetor. So we popped it out of that holder, and now the carb can hang off to the side. We could also unplug that connector and remove the carburetor. And in fact, we will a little later. So now there's going to be 3 intake holes, 2 on the bottom and 1 on the top. And the bottom ones get plugs. The top one gets this plate. And the plate also holds the plugs in. This is Husqvarna factory block-off kit for this saw. I don't have any part numbers for you. We don't want to get carried away tightening this up and wreck something. So now our intake, exhaust are both plugged. And we have an adapter and a spark plug hole. I'm just putting this stopper in the fuel line so I don't get any schmutz in here. I want to clean this out decent now that I've got everything blocked off. So there's a lot of videos on YouTube about pressure vacuum testing. We're going to put 7 pounds of pressure on here, let it sit. And it shouldn't drop more than a pound in the first minute or more than 4 pounds in 5 minutes, or I don't remember, something like that. Basically, if it's tight, it's tight. That's the way I look at it. If it's leaking, then I find the leak. In this case, the saw passed both the pressure and vacuum tests. And you might be wondering why we do a vacuum test. Well, that checks the crank seals. So I'm happy with the saw end of it, and we're going to open up the carburetor now and take a look in there and see if we can find the problem. Those of you that follow my videos, you know that I have a carb stand. Well, this video is like a year old, and it's before I made that stand. You know, in all this time without a carb stand, and about a year ago or so I made one. So I showed you that I just tapped on that little piece of throttle linkage there. And that was because you need to put an eyeball on it before you take this apart so you can put it together the right way. Now that we have that piece off of there, we can remove our fuel pump plate, pump diaphragm plate, whatever you want to call it. Underneath it, there's a micro screen that all the fuel passes through that comes from the tank. And this is the first place it hits when it gets to the carburetor. And look at that. I mean, it looks kind of bad in this picture, but you ain't seen nothing yet. So that micro screen, we just pop it out of there. And we're going to document this. Get a few pictures of it. Now, you know, what is that stuff? That's the big question. Well, we're going to put a new set of gaskets in here. I kind of do that all the time when I open up a carburetor. I like to put new gaskets in it, even though the carb was tight. And that gasket kit doesn't come with a micro screen, but I've got extras, so we'll put a new micro screen in it. You just get it lined up and take something. I mean, this happens to be the official tool for it, but you can use, you know, the back of a hex bit or something like that. Anything close to that size. And just get it seated in there nice and even. I mean, between the fuel filter and that screen, you know, that's pretty much the repair. Sure, there's a lot of stuff we got to do to get there and get back home, but those were the problems. So we're going to screw the pump plate back down. And then we're going to look at the metering diaphragm. I mean, we're this far, we got a gasket kit sitting in front of us, why not, right? I want to look at that metering lever height anyway. I mean, the diaphragm looks good. That height is supposed to be, the height of the metering lever is supposed to be flush with the top of the sides of the carburetor. And it was a little low. So we're going to tweak that. Physically bending the metering lever, that's what we're doing here. New gasket, new metering diaphragm, and metering diaphragm cover. There's also a bracket here for the electrical connector that we use for plugging it into the computer. The one end of it latches into this bracket. We'll get this all screwed together. And if you remembered how that linkage looked before you took it apart, there should be no problem putting it back together. Once you get it lined up, there's just 2 screws that hold it down. There we go. So one other thing that I was looking at while I had that carburetor in my hand is there's a magnet on the linkage that the auto-tune uses for throttle position. We just look at that and make sure that there's nothing stuck to it. So we connected the white connector for auto-tune. We're pushing the carburetor up against the intake. We're going to put the fuel line on the side of the carburetor. We're going to get the throttle cable attached. This is really kind of an easy job because that cable holds a memory. And basically once you give it some slack and open up the throttle manually, you can just hit the trigger and it'll lock right in, just like that. Alright, so our airbox holder, you want to be careful before you clean this up because there's a gasket right here. You don't want to make that disappear, maybe not even realizing you made it disappear. Now, I don't normally take it out before I clean this. I usually just hold my thumb over the top of it. But there we go. We got some cleaned up parts. We're going to put that airbox air filter holder back on. So we've got the wires that I talked about earlier that snapped into that bracket on top of the carb. Then we got a fuel line on top of the carb. We'll attach that. And then we'll plug in the diagnostic port for the auto-tune. Now we're connecting the fuel return line to the back of the purge bulb, and then it snaps into some connectors on the back of the airbox. Put our screws in that bolt the airbox and the carburetor to the intake. You don't want to get carried away with this. You want to finish the tightening by hand. And then drop the airbox down into the saddles. Quick function check. Everything seems to be working the way it should. We're not going to need this adapter anymore, so we'll pull that out of there. Spark plug goes back in. Air filter goes back on. And we removed our block off plate on the exhaust, and then we'll put our muffler back on. It's kind of nice working on a saw that someone takes care of. I mean, I didn't have to clean much on this thing at all. So we got our muffler torqued down. We're going to put some fuel in it and give it a test run. Oh, you sent that to her? Oh, I thought she was playing games with you.
No, I sent that to her.
Yeah, I think she'll get the hint. You're sleeping in the garage tonight.
Oh, shit.
So he can measure his cut.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so you make a cut,
Yeah.
and then you line the pink on the end of the last cut, so that moves you over to here.
Yeah.
This is in the Woodyard.
In the Woodyard.
Yeah. The guy that does the YouTube channel in the Woodyard.
What is his name? Starts with a C, doesn't it?
Chris. He bought that first $5.92 from us.
Oh, and he came here yesterday.
He did, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, he bought a G. Same thing, but a
He
G.
bought this but a G, right?
Yep.
And it doesn't look like it now, but this was his problem.
What is that, a screen?
Yeah, this is inside the carburetor.
I don't think it's supposed to be flaky like that, is
No,
it?
it's not. And when it's wet, it looks like this.
Some fuel passes through that?
Well, it's supposed to.
But that's what, why does it gum up like that? Dirty fuel, or?
It can be something in the fuel. Also, Husqvarna has now upgraded the fuel filter to something a little finer than this. Since I started putting the new filters in,
You haven't had a
I
problem.
haven't had one of these come back.
So you just gotta change that screen out, or you gotta burn it out?
I changed it. You could clean that and reuse it, just a metal screen. But I just put a new one in. So the auto tune was saying, I need more fuel, I need more fuel, I need more fuel. And it was at the maximum, I need more fuel setting.
Gotcha.
But it wasn't getting any fuel because this
that
was plugged.
up.
So this is what we got. This is the micro screen fresh out of the carburetor. I mean, you can barely see parts of the screen here where I was picking at it. And this is what it looked like after it dried. So it's probably not the inside of the fuel line rotting out and plugging it up because it's white. I think it's part of this fuel filter. I'm not sure if that is an original Husky filter or not. The owner didn't think that he had ever changed it. In the end, I think that the filter can be blamed on this because it's been a year since he got the saw back. And I haven't heard any complaints about it not running right. What did we change? The filter and the micro screen. You know, he's got a lot of saws and he didn't have any problems with the rest of them. So he's using the same fuel in other saws. I really got to think that it was the filter in this case. So that's all I'm going to have for you on the 572 XP that wouldn't run because of a plugged micro screen. Thanks for watching. Later.